Good afternoon. My first guest today is Nathalie Chambers. Nathalie's the co-operator of Madrona Farm in Saanich. Nathalie, thanks for coming in today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Appreciate your time. So, very briefly, tell us about your efforts to protect farmland in the Blenkinsop Valley.
Okay, well, it's been happening. We've been working for the last 14 years and protecting farmland in the agricultural land reserve and in Saanich's urban containment boundary. The Blenkinsop Valley, which rides from Royal Oak to Mackenzie, essentially is protected by two rings of power, the agricultural land reserve and the Saanich municipality. So the Saanich has an urban containment boundary around it, which protects the valley through land use regulations.
How big a parcel of land is it that's protected?
The entire Blenkinsop Valley? I'm not sure of the answer to that question. I think it's about 3 kilometers,
Okay.
the Blenkinsop Valley, so not a great amount of land, but a very fertile cultural landscape that we are very fortunate to have.
And as I understand it, there's been a lot of infringements on the agricultural, on the Blenkinsop Valley,
Yes.
even despite it being in the agricultural land reserve.
Yes.
So one example I read about was industrial operations that should be restricted to industrially zoned land are actually being done on farmland.
Yes.
So, and my understanding too is that the process of bringing this to the attention of the authorities is complaint driven. You've lodged many complaints. So why isn't the complaint-driven system working?
Okay, well, just firstly, the largest obstacle to food security on Vancouver Island, BC, and Canada is the price of farmland. One of the ways that farmland becomes inflated is by allowing non-permitted industrial uses to continue. Because that means, because industrial lands, they cost more than agricultural lands. So coming there means a cost savings for those users. So essentially, what it comes down to is the taxpayer ends up subsidizing the costs for the non-permitted uses while forwarding the debt onto future generations. And that debt is compaction of soil, it is contamination of soil, compaction of soil, and it is really hard to get those uses out once they're in.
Yeah, so, you know, farmlands compared to industrial land, compared to residential land, is cheap. Once you bump it up to industrial, it becomes more costly. And if
That's
you bump
right.
it up to residential, then it's extremely costly. So is that...
Well, one of the really large problems is the farmland in BC is speculated at almost the same price as residential real estate, and that is the case in Saanich as well.
Is that on the assumption, when it's speculated at the same price, is that on the assumption that whoever buys it, although it may be a bit of a challenge, they can eventually get it zoned for
Yes,
residential?
it is. It's speculation of removing it out of the agricultural land reserve and not being held accountable by Saanich.
So why isn't Saanich enforcing the laws that to basically protect the agricultural land reserve in Blenkinsop Valley?
Okay, well, there's two issues. There's the double ring of protection, like I already mentioned, but that issue is also divided into two issues. So one of the issues is we have a 12,000 kg weight restriction on Blenkinsop.
For trucks?
For trucks, overweight trucks. The reason being is that the roads can only support trucks that are under that weight. And so basically allowing those trucks to go unmonitored, and I'm not sure I've ever seen Saanich monitor the weight restriction on Blenkinsop. So the only trucks that are allowed through are on local delivery. So that's put a lot of fast traffic on Blenkinsop. And the other reason why it gets a bit gray area is well, something that recently I just found out after 2 years of trying to change this problem, complaining to the ALR and then to Saanich to, take care of their urban containment boundary, we found out that we had been complaining to the wrong spot. And I'm hoping this information will help other British Columbians in protecting farmland, and that is through the finance department in their local municipalities.
Okay.
Because finance issues business licenses, and with business licenses there is a weight restriction on the vehicles parked. So we have the vehicles that are driving through the valley, one problem. The second problem is we have many parking lots in the Blenkinsop Valley containing industrial vehicles that are not permitted, that are polluting, compacting, and inflating the price of farmland. So if a municipality who claims to be interested in protecting food security is not monitoring these things, it's very difficult to protect them.
Okay. Food security has always been one of those concepts that I've kind of tried to make sense of. And as I understand it, food security is kind of like at a macro level and a micro level. The micro level, food security being the ability of a family or individual to eat healthy, to have access to food that enables them to enjoy a healthy, active life.
Yes.
And at the macro level, it's more of a systems perspective, in the sense, does this jurisdiction, this province, this country, this county, whatever, have security with respect to a system of food delivery? Is that a pretty simple?
Okay, so distribution, I understand. Well, one of the things about food security is that farmland is the foundation of food security. Soil. A lot of people, sometimes when you ask kids these days where carrots come from, they'll say,
50s.
Costco or something like that, and it's just like we have to remember that our food security is based on our ability to protect farmland. And so it's all fine to, have these bylaws and these, restrictions, but if we're not protecting them and enforcing them, then the farmland is being destroyed. And so it's really, we need to get out of our offices and we need to get on the ground, a boots-on approach, because there's lots of things going on in the valley. And one of the things Saanich doesn't do is they don't monitor by their maps. So the whole system is based on a complaint-driven bylaw system, okay? So in my thinking, that is not the world that I want to live in, because in essence, what it does is, if we have, here we'll just give 2 anonymous Saanich citizens. One of those citizens does their best, does a good job, does all these things, asks for permits, follows the rules. When they sell their home at the end of their time there, they don't receive a financial benefit. But if there is an unpermitted user, somebody who goes in self-entitled and makes improvements that maybe aren't allowed, and maybe it's not part of the greater official community plan in Saanich, but when they sell their place, they receive a benefit, which is more cash than what the other person receives. So in my mind, I believe that Saanich, BC, Canada, we should be focusing on exemplar behavior, and we should be giving tax benefit to exemplar behavior, like in the case with the Environmental Protection Act in Saanich. I believe that people that have large quantities of oak trees or biodiversity on their property, as an incentive for them to carry on their stewardship, tax breaks are a very good way to do that. We should be not subsidizing non-permitted users. We should be giving tax benefit to the people who are following the rules.
Yeah, so this way, right now the cheaters seem to be getting all the benefits.
Yes, and many Saanich residents are unhappy about this.
Let's go back to food security for a
Yes,
second.
sorry.
No, it's okay. Because like you say, the foundation of food security is farmland.
Yes.
Okay, that's where the carrots grow. Let's just
Yes.
start there. So I don't know, BC has something like 5% of arable land.
Yes.
So, and with its population, so would that make BC a food insecure province?
Unfortunately, despite BC's stellar growing conditions, especially on the southern coast where we live in the rain shadow of the Olympic and the Cascades, a world-class biodiversity hotspot, it's crazy that BC has the highest food insecurity and is the highest users of food banks nationally. So it doesn't make sense.
Well, I remember you, there was a quote I read that you said that people think of food security, well, as long as you can go into Thrifties and buy what you want,
Right.
then we're food secure.
Right.
So the notion of a family not having food security at the family level, and they're forced to go to food banks in order
Yes.
to get the food that they need. So that would be, like I say, family or individual food insecurity. But at a provincial level, in terms of our capacity to provide the necessary food.
We have it.
So
We have it. We have enough farmland on this. We have a Vancouver Island diet potential. If we are to protect every piece of farmland that we have, we can definitely do it. And
so you could feed I don't know, how many people on Vancouver Island? 750,000, something like that. So we could feed them
definitely.
with the amount of
And
farmland
it would
we have
be
in
a
Vancouver.
climate change logical plan as well, because we wouldn't be transporting it over large distances, wasting carbon, etc.
Remember you saying that the model they have in the UK,
Yes.
which is I forget what it's called here. It's called
The National Trust.
The National Trust. So they've got an extraordinary amount of farmland under
protected.
protection. The farmland protection.
233,000 hectares, and they have hundreds of tenanted farmers.
Okay, and so that's without a doubt a food secure nation.
I don't think it is.
Still, even with that amount of farmland.
I think they're working really hard with their Buy British labeling. I'm not sure what's going on there now, but I did do a staff exchange at the National Trust, and I know they were working very hard to get a British label there for their food. So one of the things about the National Trust is, one of the things about farming that some people may not want to get into it is because they hear it's not economically viable. Well, the thing that makes it not economically viable is the speculation of farmland. So I am all for farmland trusts as long as they have 4 separate signatories. I made a presentation to Saanich municipality last year about becoming a farmlands trust, and it was unanimously passed and sent on to the CRD. And I'm hoping to have more input on that, because it is very important that we always involve a land trust in our farmland protection, and not just one signatory, 4 different. So, municipal government, CRD, regional, and maybe the ALR and a land trust. So those are the legs of a table. We need to have 4 pillars of protection around farmland, because that's how amazing it is.
Right now, the Blenkinsop Valley, you talked about the double ring or the dual ring of protection, and one is the fact that it's in the ALR, and the second is, and that's a provincial jurisdiction. And the second ring is basically, or reinforcing that ring, is it's in the urban containment
Yes.
boundary of Saanich,
Yes.
which is incorporated into their official community plan.
Yes. One of the things I'm not sure if I mentioned, in 1970, the Blenkinsop Valley was deemed an agricultural greenway by the council of the day. They put a resolution around the whole entire valley to be protected that way. So these bylaws and legislations, they're already existing.
So you got
we don't have to change anything.
So you got like 3 rings of protection, if you will, around the Blenkinsop Valley.
Exactly.
And yet there's this incredible degree of intrusion of agricultural uses.
That's right. So my belief is that if we are to protect soil, as my mission here is bees, frogs, and soil. And if we are to protect those attributes, which are keystone in creating the environment to grow food in, we are going to have to develop teeth now and learn to say the word no, and start thinking about developing our tax base based on finding these industrial uses and hiring more bylaw officers in Saanich, or whatever it is going to take for this valley to be protected in perpetuity as it was set out in 1977. And added to that, we also did a municipal farmlands challenge at Madrona Farm, where we have the promises and pledges of Mayor and Council in Saanich to protect the Blenkinsop Valley and lands in the CRD and beyond.
Okay, so the promises there, I mean, now you've got now like about 4 rings of protection. You've got the 3 that we already talked about.
That's right.
And now you have the on-paper pledge of the current council.
That's right.
To, you know, rigorously reinforce the
That's right.
the bylaws.
Unfortunately, the complaint-driven bylaw system is not a fun system to operate because people, you know, they resent being, they resent being complained upon, and many people are not informed of the uses prior to purchasing their land. So they have an assumption, and when that can't be met, often, you know, they push.
So you said one of the quotes I read was you said the public feels unsafe to make complaints about
Yes.
non-compliant uses. So
Yes.
where does the feeling of lack of safety come?
Okay, well, I'll just tell you about my life as a roadside observer on Blenkinsop at a veggie stand. I'm just a girl at a veggie stand and a woman. And we have many people in Saanich who are scared to make complaints, so they come and they tell us. And it just put us in a very uncomfortable position.
Okay.
Because we would...
You're the mouthpiece.
That's
You become
right,
the mouthpiece for everybody else.
that is not a position that I like, but it is a responsibility that I'm taking because really, when you have a relationship with your customers at a vegetable stand and they ask you a question,
that's part of your service.
it's part of my service and integrity. So,
Yeah. Natalie, I wish we had more time today. As I said, 18 minutes goes by very quickly, but thank you so much for coming in
thank
today.
you so much.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
That concludes the first segment of the CRD in Context. My next guest is Ian Robertson. Ian's the CEO of the Greater Victoria Harbour Authority. Thanks for coming in today, Ian.
Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Appreciate your time. So just a bit of background. The Greater Victoria Harbour Authority is a non-profit corporation that owns several operations in the harbour, such as Ogden Point, a fisherman's wharf, and the steamship terminal. And right now there's planning for a $300 million, decades-long development at Ogden Point. It's underway. I had an open house last week, and you've had previous ones. How's that going?
Well, the feedback and the participation that we've had from the public has been fantastic. As you commented on, we had another community session last week. We've got another one coming up in the next couple of weeks, and all told, we'll have about 32 different meetings, stakeholder workshops, open houses, really to get the feedback from the public and input as to what they'd like to see down at Ogden Point.
So 32 over how long a period of time?
Oh boy, it's been kind of going on probably for the last 6 to 8 months.
And the response from the general public has been
Very positive. I think they've been very grateful that they've had the opportunity to input as to what they'd like to see down at Ogden Point. We've certainly heard around what they wouldn't like to see, and we've also heard from them on the positive aspects. And I think for the most part, the public's pretty excited about the opportunity we have down there.
Well, it's an opportunity. I think that the editorial in the Times Colonist described it as you've got a blank canvas, and it's huge. So
Yes.
it's how many hectares?
It's 32 acres altogether.
32 acres.
Yeah, I'm
No, same with me.
Yes.
32. So that's a sizable chunk of
It
prime
is.
waterfront real estate.
If you think about Greater Victoria, it's probably one of the last remaining sites that can be developed. The fact, as you mentioned, is right on the waterfront, makes it even more exciting. It was one of the opportunities that really brought me to Victoria, was to play a role in helping to kind of steward the process, because as you may know, we've been at this apparently for about almost the last 8 or 9 years. So I use a kind of a horse racing term that we're kind of rounding the clubhouse bend, or rounding the clubhouse turn, in terms of getting the master plan completed and in front of City Council for approval.
And that's the rezoning application for the master plan is going to happen later this year?
That's right. We have a commitment to the City of Victoria to have it in front of them by the end of the year. So the clock's ticking down.
So what, in terms of a successful planning process, what does that mean to you? What does that look like? What makes for a successful planning process of this scope?
Yeah. I think for me, the most important part is the collaboration with the community. And I know sometimes the word collaboration gets overused, but I can't really underline that enough. That for me, it's about ensuring that we've taken the time to present a wide-ranging plan. We've received input from the public, and we've done our best to balance the needs of what the public has in terms of expectations, but at the same time recognizing that it's a working harbor. It's a port, it's a terminal. It will always be that, but how can we incorporate and how can we blend in some of the needs of the community?
Well, it's certainly a working harbor, as you point out, with respect to cruise ships. So basically last year, over 227 cruise ships that docked at Ogden Point, brought 500,000 passengers and over 200,000 crew, and had close to a $100 million impact on Greater Victoria. So is there some sort of optimum number of cruise ships? Is there can we ever have too many cruise ships?
Well, I think that's a really good question. Right now we have the capacity, we have 4 berths, but really we're only utilizing 3 because one of the berths makes it difficult for the other berth to be used because we're getting larger ships coming into Victoria. So essentially we have 3 berths. And for most of a Friday and Saturday in the evening, they're busy. The opportunity that we have, so to answer your question, I think we've still got some room to grow on what I'll call the ships that make Victoria a port of call, which we are right now. Where I think there's opportunity for us to grow and where there's significant benefit for the Greater Victoria economy is to become a home port. Right now, Seattle and Vancouver are the 2 home ports for cruising up to Alaska. Both of those ports are becoming very limited in terms of berth space, and I think that's opening up a terrific window for Victoria to jump into.
So what's the advantage of being a home port as opposed to just a port of call?
Well, I'll talk in numbers. Right now, based on the research that we've had done, a ship making a port of call is worth anywhere from $350,000 to $400,000 in terms of direct and indirect spending anytime a ship comes in. Based on numbers that we've been able to get from Tourism Vancouver and through Destination British Columbia, that number jumps by 5 times. In other words, each ship with a home port becomes worth close to $2 million. And the reason for that is that when guests come in and depart, or they leave or come in on a cruise ship, they're spending 3 or 4 days at either end of their journey. So that's days in a hotel room, restaurants, shopping, activities, plus not to mention the provisioning opportunities that it creates for a lot of the local merchants and suppliers to supply the ship. So that's why you've got a significantly higher economic benefit to the region with a home port ship versus a ship that's just making a port of call.
Right. So the home port is where the passengers cruise begins and where it ends.
That's right. That's correct.
And so that bumps it up 5-fold.
Yes.
Wow. So nearby residents in James Bay, we all know where Ogden Point is, they seem to be taking the biggest negative hit in terms of increased bus traffic, impeded views, and air quality. But last year in the news there was a milestone reached in the sense that you had the best overall air quality readings for a full cruise season since it began in 2009, and there wasn't any exceeding of any standards, whether they be provincial or federal or whatever. So this wouldn't an onshore power facility solve this whole issue of air quality?
Well, you know what? We're not quite sure, and we're getting more data on it. The last time the Harbour Authority looked at this was back in, I think, 2011, 2012. And at the time, it was determined that shore power wasn't financially feasible. There was a couple of reasons for that. Number one...
That it wasn't?
It wasn't, yeah. Of the 22 ships, the 22 different ships that were making calls in Victoria at the time, only 8 were shore power capable. And also at the time, the ships weren't spending a long time in port. Engineering have told us that to kind of plug in a ship takes an hour and a half for it to plug in and generate enough power for the ships to turn off their engine. Same thing happens when they're departing. It takes an hour and a half for them to power down, and turn on their engines. So if you think about 3 hours, and at the time, ships were in for anywhere from 4 to 5 hours, didn't make much sense. And then when you layer on the financial impact, the cost was going to be upwards of $10 to $12 million to bring the infrastructure in. At the time, it didn't make much sense. However, I've asked for that information to be relooked. I mean, after all, it is 4 years later. We've got newer technology. I've asked staff to update on how many of the ships coming in now. I think we've got 26 different ships coming in. How many of them are shore power capable? And also we've seen some ships coming in and spending a longer period of time. Certainly if we become a home port, we're going to have to look at this. So
Yeah.
still more information to be gained, and but I think it's worth us taking a second look.
Well, it's interesting because I read the figure 10 million. I'm thinking, okay, they bring in 500 million, and my assumption was that a $10 million once in a lifetime hit to put in this facility would take care of it all. But as you've well explained, it isn't quite that simple. In terms of the cruise industry sensitivity to community concerns, you had an interesting. You've said that the cruise industry, which would be the anchor tenant at Ogden Point, the cruise industry itself has suggested that Ogden Point be built as an extension of the community, because if residents like it, the cruise ship passengers will like it as well.
Yes.
So explain that, how that works.
Yeah, well, it was an interesting comment. I was actually quite surprised by it, because if if you look at some of the other ports that they do business in, whether it be Alaska or Mexico or the Caribbean, they pretty much own the town, and they own the terminal and the infrastructure. So I was pleasantly surprised when I had that feedback provided to me, in that they said to us, keep it simple, and also build it for the residents, build it for the community, because if the residents like it, the community likes it, then the passengers will like it. So what I read into that was, keep it simple, make it something that fits in with the community, and make it a terminal that the community is going to be drawn to.
It's that simple.
Yes.
Okay, but you seem to have two communities here. You've got the greater Victoria community, and then you've got your James Bay community.
Yes.
So, which community are you trying to, be one with? The larger one or the smaller one, or somehow both?
Well, I think it's somehow both. I mean, it's recognizing that the benefits of the cruise industry and what we do down at Ogden Point benefits the greater community, the greater Victoria community. But it's also understanding and recognizing that the local community is impacted. So the challenging, and it's a real challenge here, is trying to balance the needs of the community and mitigate the impact that cruise has upon that community, while at the same time advocate and support and strengthen that terminal, that working harbor, and that terminal that's been down there for over 100 years and has always been an industrial terminal. So I think that's the balance we need to find, and quite honestly, it's a challenge daily to find that right balance.
Well, in terms of the feedback that you're getting at these open houses, members of the public come in, so I imagine they're bending your ear about
Yes.
various things. Like, do you sense that you're going to be able to get to that balance point?
Yeah, I think so, because we've done a couple of things. First of all, we are going to be introducing the world's first purpose-built electric double-decker bus, and we had expected that to arrive in Victoria about 5 months ago at the beginning of our cruise season. Lots of reasons why it's delayed. The most important thing is it's here now, and we're going to unveil that to the public and to the industry very, very soon. I think that's sending a positive signal to the community that we recognize, understand the impact that bus movement has through the neighborhood, and we're taking really hard steps to address that. The other thing that we've done is we've introduced fees and charges. Essentially what we've done is we've said to the tour operator, okay, if you're going to utilize an older bus that is noisier, emits more emissions, we're going to charge you a higher dollar fee per passenger than we are if you utilize a newer bus. And we've been able to, just literally in 1 year, move the needle anywhere from about 7 years on average in terms of the average age of the buses. The other thing we've done is we've really worked hard in partnership with the Port of Seattle to promote the walkability of the terminal relative to downtown Victoria. So we're doing a number of things. These are things that people kind of see behind the scenes. The electric bus is going to be a really obvious sign that we're working on things, but the fees and charges, promoting the walkability, these are all the steps behind the scenes that we're taking that really do help to mitigate the impact in the neighborhood.
Okay, so I mean, I'm looking at the figures here in terms of 500,000 passengers, one double-decker electric bus. It just doesn't, it would, symbolically, it would be a sign, it would be a good indicator.
Yes.
But in terms of its actual capacity to replace some of the other buses that are more, intrusive into the community, in other words, it doesn't seem very big.
Yeah, and this is a test. We're using new technology that's never been utilized in North America. We're partnering with Green Power Motor Company, who brought this idea to us, and our partners at Western Stevedoring and CVS Sightseeing, and we're testing this. If this is successful, look for more of this to come. So really, next year, when this bus will be put into operation for the 2017 season, this is a test. I mean, this is not, we know that a bus carrying 100 passengers is only going to move the needle slightly. But really, this is about getting an opportunity to test this new technology, and if it works, then look for more to come. So
in terms of, you obviously have a close working relationship with the cruise ship industry. How do you ensure that you maintain your independence from the cruise industry? Obviously, you look at the economic benefits,
Yes.
They're substantial. You want these people to come, you want them to become a home port, not just a port of call. And at the same time, you're CEO of a nonprofit, and you have a responsibility to protect, to look after the interests of the people of Greater Victoria. So how do you guard against becoming too closely dependent on the cruise industry?
Yeah, again, a great question. And I think that, as I was referring to in the earlier comments, the one step that we've taken and we will continue to take is that, unlike other ports, terminals in other parts of the world, whether it be Alaska, Mexico, or the Caribbean, where the cruise lines own the terminal and own the operation, we're not going to go there, and we'll never go there. The other thing is that I think it's important that's why we see the development of Ogden Point and the master plan unfold, because what will happen is the master plan will give us the flexibility to bring in other sources of revenue. So what that means is we won't become so dependent on the cruise ship revenue to run our operation and deliver a surplus that we need to reinvest back into our properties. So I think that's always mindful for me, is that, like right now, the cruise industry represents 56% of our revenue.
Yeah,
While that is a good thing, it's also, to me, a bit of a caution, in the sense that we need to diversify our revenue streams. And so the development at Ogden Point will help us do that and continue to maintain our independence and our arm's length relationship with the cruise lines. But that said, we enjoy a very good relationship with the cruise lines. But as I said, we have to diversify and bring in other sources of revenue so that we can continue with that independence.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, though, that you're sort of using the cruise ship industry to as the lead on ultimately diversification and ultimately lessening your dependence on the cruise ship industry.
I think what's important is that we're a not-for-profit organization. We don't receive any federal or provincial funds. In fact, we pay the City of Victoria over $1 million in taxes. Yet we are required to maintain and upkeep a lot of assets that the public use. For example, the breakwater. That's a Harbour Authority property. It costs money to maintain the breakwater. The lower Inner Harbour Causeway, that's all on piles. And boy, I'm learning that keeping marine infrastructure going is an expensive proposition. So,
and Ships Point is part of that too.
Exactly. So these are all infrastructure needs that are going to require repair over the next 5 to 15, 20 years, and the money comes from the revenue that we generate as a harbor authority. So yeah, it's fun, it's interesting, but it's also, again, ensuring that we've got enough capital coming in that we can reinvest back into our properties.
Right. Ian, I wish we had more time, but I really do appreciate you coming in today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks a lot. That concludes this segment of the CRD in Context. My final guest today is Esquimalt Councillor Susan Low. Thanks for your time today, Councillor.
Oh, my pleasure.
Appreciate it. So, with the CRD's decision in mid-September to support a centralized tertiary facility at McLaughlin Point, is the 20 to 30 years of discussion finally over?
Probably. We're getting to the point where there's going to be a plant built. I am having to resign myself to that. I wouldn't go so far as to call it a tertiary plant, though.
Why not?
The thing that they're calling tertiary is something called disc filters. It's just another form of screening to reduce the solids in the liquids that will be going out into the ocean. But tertiary would be the addition of additional chemical treatment, UV oxidization, and other things that are added into the treatment process. So this isn't tertiary, let's not use that word to describe it. It's advanced secondary.
As opposed to low-end tertiary.
Yeah, well, tertiary is, technically speaking, it's any third step.
Okay.
But when engineers are designing sewage treatment plants and they're not trying to do a PR exercise, tertiary refers to a third type of process, not just additional screening. Disc filters is advanced screening.
Yeah, because you've expressed some concern that I always refer to them as the nasties, right?
Yeah.
Won't be taken out, or a good portion of them won't be taken out of the effluent that will then be discharged back into the ocean.
That's correct.
And yet it's being heralded as a huge advancement. It seems that many of the CRD directors who voted in favor of it identified that as a huge advance, and it was enough of an advance to get them to approve. I mean, the vote was 14-1. So are they deluding themselves, or is everybody tired, just want to get it done?
Okay, I think there's, to some extent, people are really tired. They want a good outcome for this. And calling it tertiary, because it will be, in fact, a third step, you can make a claim from a semantic perspective that we've miraculously found a way to get tertiary treatment for less money and a smaller footprint. The tertiary I've already dealt with. The smaller footprint is actually because they're using a process, I'm going to try and get this right, biological aerated filters, BAF, which does have, it requires less space to treat those flows. They also looked at how much volume needed to be treated and realized there was less than they thought. So they downgraded the size of the plant to fit on the footprint.
Well, the size, the capacity of the plant, the size that it's built for in terms of flow, is built on, as far as I know, 108 megaliters per day of sewage flow in average dry weather. But let's just stay with 108 megaliters per day. It's easier. What I was struck by when the project board was given its scope definition. And I read the scope definition, and there was like 6 points in there, and they were all very, very general, very broad. The parameters of your project will include meeting federal guidelines, will include meeting provincial guidelines. Again, very broad, very general. But there was one, the sixth principle was, oh, by the way, you will design it for to meet 108 megaliters per day flow. And it seemed to me that was their marching orders, so they never got to question or look at the validity of or the solidness of that figure.
Well, the 108 was developed partly by the municipalities involved, who came out with their estimates of how much flow, how much capacity each municipality would want to buy
Right.
in this plant. And the capital cost was allocated to each municipality based on how much capacity that municipality wanted, based on their own forecasts of population growth and water use and things like that. So that's where the 108 came from. It also lines up with what the Esquimalt bylaw was written for, was as a maximum size for McLaughlin. So if we think that the project board actually had an open look at different sites, I would question that because they were given the 108. And oh, look, it just so happens to be in the township of Esquimalt's bylaw that 108 megaliter per day plant is going to fit on this site. So it was kind of a led process there.
Yeah, I mean, the 108 megaliters per day is always, not so much always, but at least for the last 10 years, seems to have been somewhat of a contentious issue. When you've given that, water use is decreased, and sewage is 99% water.
Yeah.
So apparently you've got something like a 27% decrease in water usage over the last, or in flow.
Yes, in flow.
In average dry weather flow. It's now down at 70 megaliters per day. And yet we're still shooting for 108. So it seems that we've got this 108, and yet the trend line seems to be going down and down. And one of the questions that I had, well, why not just build for that capacity, or go 10 years out and build for that, and then see what we need in 10 years, see what we need in 20 years. So you build on an as-needed basis.
If we build for 70 right now, we are going to have population growth. There's going to be increased density, and although our water use per household is declining, we expect there to be growth in the region. So you have a line going down and a line going up, and you have to find a place in the middle. And this is where I actually put some faith in engineers to say, no, this is actually the best size to build if you're going to build one plant to deal with things for another 25, 30 years. We don't want to have to build another big plant in 20 years. We won't be finished paying off this one.
So you're relatively comfortable then with that to build a plant with the capacity for 108 megaliters per day?
I'm not overly delighted with building one centralized plant.
Okay, I understand that part, but in terms of the validity of the number.
Yeah, in terms of the validity of the number, yeah, I'm satisfied. We need a sewage system that addresses about that much in terms of the flows.
Looking out 40, 50 years.
Well, looking at 40, 50 years, a lot of the growth is going to be in the West Shore, and so we will want to see a plant built in the West Shore to deal with the growth that's happening there, as opposed to bringing it all to McLaughlin Point and treating it there.
And in terms of the West Shore, it's an interesting one because, again, I keep reading about, Langford Call sort of looking at the option of maybe doing something much earlier than anticipated.
Yeah.
And what I read about, and have gone to forums on, is a true tertiary system. Indeed, the effluent would be able to be put back into the ground in terms of a water discharge, so you wouldn't need to go to the long outfalls. And the other thing that struck me was not only the enhanced environmental outcome, but the costs. They talk about in the neighborhood of $60 per year per door. Mm-hmm. Then I look at what's going on over on the other side, and we're into the $250 category. So could a Langford Call I'm going to get you to speculate here, which I know politicians hate to do, but could a Langford Call exit going with a high-end tertiary ground dispersal, $60 a door? Could that be a game changer? Would that have a huge impact on what everybody else is doing or not?
I don't think it's going to be a game changer right now. If we could put the brakes on what's going on at McLaughlin Point and give ourselves time to look at what the West Shore could do, that could be a game changer. I would have actually liked to see us considering Clover Point or a site that deals with the east side flows separate from the west side flows. I don't really like building a tunnel across our inner harbor. I don't think that's a very smart idea. It could be a game changer, but right now there's a lot of uncertainties involved in whether or not they can get environmental permissions to put their effluent either into back into groundwater,
Yep.
into there was talk a while ago about wetlands around Royal Roads that could be
Or put it
that
into
could use
inbound waters.
Now, what's interesting is that historically there was a long outfall from the Colwood side of things, and it was decommissioned. I don't even know if it's structurally still there, but there used to be a outfall coming from near D&D lands on the west shore, and there was a plant there. It's not needed, so it's decommissioned, and I actually haven't heard anybody mention it. It came up in a discussion that I had with someone who knew how things were built 40 years ago.
You mentioned that Clover Point had been seems to have been left off the table with respect to the analysis that the project board did. They only, as far as I can tell, they only really seemed to consider Rock Bay and/or McLaughlin, and which doesn't surprise me, given that there are actually 50 green-lit sites on the table, all municipally approved in the different areas, and the project board certainly didn't have the people power or the time to really do an in-depth analysis of any other configuration.
No. And what struck me in the project board report was that they said that the rezoning process for Clover Point would take 18 months, and therefore it wasn't going to fit in the timeline provided. Now, I know that there needed to be a lot of community discussion, and certainly Esquimalt had a lot of lead up to their community processes, but we managed to do the rezoning on McLaughlin Point in 6 months.
Yeah.
And I don't know too many city planning departments that would be happy to say that a rezoning takes 18 months in their processes. That's a pretty slow business process. So I question whether there were political motives behind backing away from Clover Point as a site. And I know that a lot of the residents in the area were very concerned, as the residents of Esquimalt were when it was originally looked at for Macaulay and then McLaughlin and then the Viewfield Road. People need a chance to talk about these things and understand what it's going to mean for their community. But to take it off the table because of the timeline imposed by political decisions means that we're not allowing good engineering solutions to be seriously evaluated. And I think this is the rub for me, is that we have a project that's being built with the decisions made on political basis instead of engineering basis, but it's an engineering project. Mm-hmm. We've gone wrong.
Yeah, I mean, you, I think, mentioned in one of the quotes I saw that it's a sound decision-making process had not occurred.
No, I all along the way here, I've scratched my head and said, why on earth are we doing it that way? Why on earth are we allowing ourselves to be led by political considerations and PR considerations on what is an engineering infrastructure project? It needs to be guided by those with technical expertise and scientific expertise. And I know that the people who sit on the CRD board have spent a lot of time reading those reports, and I scratch my head because I read the same reports and come up with different conclusions.
Well, sort of the opportunity for the project board, one part of it for me was, okay, it's a provincially appointed project board. The province, holding $250 million worth of the funding, have basically taken control. And everybody can big sigh of relief. It's been taken out of the hands of the CRD directors. They've tried for 15, 20 years, can't. Now we have control. And with that degree of control, it just seemed to me that the timeline argument, could have easily subsided, because you've got one wing of the provincial government talking to basically a subset of the provincial government in terms of they appointed the people to the board. So it just seemed like this incredible opportunity was lost to just, hey, let's just take, let's not take 2 months to look at this. We've got the, we've got the province looking at it, which is a huge, for many people, step forward. Let's take 6 months, let's take 8 months to look at it. Again, for me, it was just sort of a lost opportunity.
Yeah, things seem to all be feeding towards, can we get it built by 2020 to satisfy the federal deadline? And I've never understood how that seems to be a brick wall. The federal government is made up of people, elected people, and public servants who have to make decisions. And 2 years ago, money was scarce, but now they're looking at spending lots of money. There's a whole infrastructure program. Justin Trudeau and his party are begging us for projects to spend their money on to boost the economy and rebuild infrastructure. And to think that they're going to come down hard on a 2020 deadline when they're asking for ways to spend their money, and there's no there's no federal election. No, there is a federal election in 2019, yeah. But I think if we asked the right people and pushed in the right places, we could have given more time to the project board to do a careful analysis of this. That when they came to speak to Esquimalt, it was very clear that they had been on a whirlwind. They'd been drinking from the fire hose to try to digest all of the information. And no one on that project board actually had a sewage treatment engineering background to really question and to know best practices from other places and things like that. I think they did their best, but the outcome was politically determined, I think, before they really even got into it.
Yeah, so they did their best within the time frame that they had.
Yeah.
Just a couple minutes left here, Councillor. So in terms of the procurement process, again, another sort of lost opportunity for me.
That's an interesting one.
Well, if they'd gone to a really, an open, along the lines of what I think Director Derman had recommended. Okay, we've got this, potential plan for McLaughlin. Let's see what the private sector has to offer. Let's go to them and say, here are our requirements. Give us your best. How much? What sites would you require? And here we got 50 greenlit sites. It just, again, seemed like a wonderful opportunity for an external agency called the private sector to validate, to sign off on what we have on the table.
I think what the Harbour Resource Partners has come up with, the biological aerated filter, I actually think, given the site, given what we have to treat here, it's a creative use of engineering technology. I sat down with a family member who is a wastewater treatment engineer, and we really looked at it, and the process of treatment that will get built at McLaughlin Point is going to be done technically accurately. And I asked the project board, what about the business case for allowing smaller, more innovative plants around the region? The reason we would do that is for resource recovery, so we can get the heat and the cold energy and the water. But it actually wouldn't be economical to build those sites because our heating costs are pretty low anyways. We don't have we have pretty good hydro, and water is cheap. So no one's going to pay a premium for recovered water when they can get it from the CRD for much cheaper. So the business case for selling those resources wasn't strong enough to entice the private sector actually to get involved in the project. So, we end up with a plant at McLaughlin Point, and the great pity is that it's a secondary plant, so it'll deal with organic waste, which the scientists tell us the ocean was doing fine with, and it won't deal with the nasties, the pharmaceuticals. Right. That to me is the great tragedy. We're going to spend close to $1 billion repeating on land what nature was doing for us in the water.
Well, on that happy note, I'm going to have to end this segment. But Councillor, thanks very much. Thanks so much for coming in. Okay, that concludes this segment of the CRD in Context.